Hey, folks. Today I'm talking about a very real danger that we're seeing now between India and China, and particularly as we lead up to this eclipse that's happening on June 21st in India, June 20th, late in the evening here in the West. We have to be very aware of this incredibly dangerous situation that's happening. Now, one of the reasons that it's also dangerous um, is because the eclipse path is going right through India and China. Literally, the eclipse is going to go right over this border between India and China. Now, if you're not aware, of course, people in India are aware, or a lot of people are aware, but many aren't. India and China are two of the largest. I think they're the most populous countries in the world. They're both nuclear powers, and they share a border that doesn't really have a negotiated northern. Well, they don't really have a very clearly negotiated demarcation line in Tibet. And there's an area called Ladakh where it's a kind of loosely negotiated border. Since 1962, China and India had a war, and there was a truce. Excuse me. In November 20th, 1962, there was a negotiated truce. The border was never firmly 100% established. I'm not 100%, the best historian on the negotiate or the terms of that, but for the most part, the border was not negotiated 100%, like here's the exact line. So it's always been a point of contention since November 1962 when they went to war. Late Monday, the violence, late Monday of 2020, that would be June 15th here in the West. The violence, I'm just reading from an article that I saw, reached dangerous heights when 20 soldiers, including an army officer, were killed by Chinese troops. Both armies have rushed in thousands of reinforcements. Indian analysts say that China has beefed up its forces with dump trucks, excavators, troop carriers, artillery, armored vehicles, and that China is now occupying Indian territory. So that loosely negotiated border, China seems to have overstepped. They fired on Indian troops and killed 20 soldiers, including an officer. And India has yet to respond. But again, now we have an eclipse that's passing right through that area. And it's definitely not a good thing. It's quite dangerous, as you might imagine. And I'm going to look at the chart of when here's the eclipse path. I just wanted to bring this up. This section here is the most concentrated part of the eclipse. It starts in a wide, a very wide solar eclipse starts here over Africa. It's very long and concentrated eclipse because the planets are right on the node, which I'll show you when I bring up the chart. But it starts here, and then by the time its most concentrated, dense area of the most concentrated part of the eclipse, of the solar eclipse, happens right here, right on the area where the Indian and Chinese troops are trying to establish this border and fighting over this border. So this is clear indications of this eclipse affecting this area and where most of the people in the world, the two most populous countries. India has 1.5 billion people, same with China. And this is, this is really, really dangerous. Two nuclear powered countries. God knows what could happen with nuclear. Again, not to say there's going to be nuclear war, but these are two nuclear powered countries, and heavily populated countries. This area is not, because it's between India and Tibet. But this whole area has been there's been a lot of skirmishes here over the last couple years in Kashmir and in other areas. Again, people are free to pipe in and give more background on the politics of this skirmish. But certainly, especially since Modi has come in India, he's definitely much more nationalist and definitely pushing back strong against any kind of incursions into India. I know a lot of the things that have been happening in Kashmir has to do with Islam and Muslim incursions and into Hindu nationalist rights and stuff. Again, I don't want to open up any Pandora's box of Indian politics. I should research it a little bit more, frankly. But this area of the world has definitely been a point of contention in many ways, aside from people's political views of who Modi is and what his politics are. I'm not going to get into it. Okay. So, but aside from that, what we have besides that is an eclipse that's happening right on this at this exact point where two nuclear powered armies are squaring off, ready to do battle. God help us if they do. And the people of India and China, Tibet are in peril with this potential border skirmish and the eclipse happening right there. So let's look at the astrology, and we'll see also some very important indicators. So this is where we are right now. This is I'm doing this on June 17th, 2020. That's in the West. Let me pull up the toolbar here. We'll move this forward a few days. And we have the eclipse happening. I have the outer planets here because they're often indicative of longer term trends that maybe go back, 30, 40, 50 years. We can see that this is right after the eclipse on the 21st. This is on the 20th. See, this is why. Let me move it forward a day and then back it up a few hours. Okay. So this is when the eclipse is happening. You see sun and moon exact around this time. Again, this is 11 p.m. on the 20th. This is almost midnight on the 20th in the U.S. So this is the June 21st in India and China and in that part of the world. So again, you can see we have Saturn and Jupiter retrograde in Capricorn right on top of Pluto, which is a planet of destruction, transformation, more culturally, longer term trends, more like wiping out and sort of obliterating sort of long-term, long-standing things like long-standing conflicts and situations that you might see are changing or that need to change. Pluto will often be meaningful and important. And you see Pluto had just gone into Capricorn and now it's gone retrograde back into going back into Sagittarius. So again, Pluto is also very close to this Jupiter, Saturn, especially very close to Pluto. Jupiter is going right over Pluto now, exact degree. So again, Jupiter is about justice. Again, it's retrograde. So this is why, again, even in U.S. politics and even around the world, we see especially the Black issue, Black Lives Matter, protests all around the world, not just in the U.S., with Jupiter going retrograde, reversing injustice, right on Pluto as well. So again, we could see that we can see the sort of indications just in a general sense right now. But then again, with this eclipse that we're seeing happening right over that hot spot, we could see why it's really coming to a boil here between the India and China border. So let's go back and look at the chart of when it was negotiated, where this peace was negotiated. It was November 20th, 1962. This says San Diego, India. It's not San Diego. It's in India. But again, it doesn't matter that because this is the day. We see Saturn was in Capricorn again. So this is a Saturn return. This is the second Saturn return since the end of that negotiation. So this was about 60 years ago. So this is the second Saturn return of that border skirmish. Saturn returns are often reset, where you have to recommit or renegotiate something. So again, 60 years, that's a Saturn cycle. And we're seeing this Saturn return happen. Forget the ascendant and all that. But we also see, again, Jupiter is here. They fought the battle for a couple years. And so again, Jupiter and Saturn had joined in Capricorn while they were battling over this area. Okay, so that that actual skirmish that took place in India and China actually started in 1960. I'm looking here, and it was in 1962 that it was that this was finally negotiated. I'm looking here. I just looked at it. Sort of looked at the exact date. In that it said it occurred in 1962. For 1960 to hinder Chinese patrols. India initiated a defensive forward policy from 1960 to hinder Chinese military patrols. So, yeah, Chinese military action grew increasingly aggressive after India rejected proposed Chinese diplomatic settlements throughout 1960 to 1962. So that's what I wanted to say, is that 1960, that it started a renewed tension in the area. And if we go back a couple years, you'll see we go back even 1 year from this negotiation. Again, this was the end of 1960. Saturn and Jupiter were joined in Sagittarius. A year later, Saturn and Jupiter are joined in Capricorn. This was in 1961. So again, this is 1961. This is now. So this is again, one thing to understand is every 60 years we have a Saturn-Jupiter return. Whenever Saturn-Jupiter returns, like when you see it, it's also a 60-year return. By the way, that's in any birth chart. When you hit your 60th birthday, it's the time when you have, again, not the exact day, but at that time, generally, you'll have a Saturn and a Jupiter return happening at the same time. Because Saturn returns about every 30 years, 28 and a half to 30 years, and Jupiter returns every 12 years. So you'll have a second Saturn return and a fifth Jupiter return that coincides on your 60th birthday. So anytime you get around the 60th birthday of anything, it's actually a coincidental Saturn-Jupiter return. So when I saw this had been negotiated in 1962, I knew they were close to a Saturn-Jupiter coincidental return. So that's what's happening now. Again, 1960. So again, 1960, we're in 2020 now. Saturn, Jupiter were joined in Sagittarius. Then 61, they were joined in Capricorn. And now 62, this is when they negotiated that border loosely. And here's where we are right now with Pluto joined very close. At the time this was settled, it was also, K2 was very close to Saturn. Again, forget the ascendant, but Jupiter was in Aquarius. And again, just to go back and see, we have right now, we have this eclipse happening right. The most intense point of the eclipse is right here, right on the China-India border. So we need to pray heavily for this to work out, man. This could be just, again, we're all focused, at least the world, at least in the Western world, very focused on like COVID, on race relations. Of course, in India, they've also seen a resurgence of COVID in India as well. And again, so India, especially India and China, with this eclipse hitting both of their countries here, again, this is a perilous omen here. It looks quite ominous right now that those two countries, this area of the world, is getting the full kind of focus of this solar eclipse. So we shouldn't be surprised that right before it, again, I talked about the eclipse a couple days ago, people think it's that day something happens. No, it's an energetic vortex that's literally like a month or so, month and a half at its most concentrated. We're getting right near the most concentrated part of it right now. Here in the US, there's this big rally that's going to happen that's blowing a lot of things up politically, and all kinds of things are coming to a head in the US, which I'm not going to talk about, even literally on that day. But we need to be careful and send our prayers to the Indian and Chinese people for cool heads to prevail. Again, what's happened so far in the skirmish is that the Chinese moved the line and encroached on what had been traditionally respected as the Indian demarcation line. China pushed beyond it, fired on Indian troops and killed 20, including a general, and India has yet to respond. Again, Modi has been very much like, we're going to respond. India is not taking it anymore. India is not going to take it being, being terrorized by Muslim terrorism or whatever it is. Again, don't beat me up over Modi. I'm not saying Modi is great. I'm simply saying the rhetoric and the policies. He's been extremely hard, hitting back really hard against those because India, frankly, because India is generally an open and tolerant society. It's just been there's just been incursions from so many directions in Indian culture, and Modi's whole way of looking at it is to restore Indian nationalism, very much nationalism. Again, I'm not commenting on. Again, there's already been a comment. India, Modi is Hitler and all. I don't want to get into all that. Again, nationalism for sure. But one of the things is this whole idea that we're not going to take it. You attack us, you're going to get attacked back. And there hasn't been an attack yet. He hasn't attacked. There hasn't been a counterattack after the. There hasn't been a counterattack after the initial incursion from China into crossing the border. So, I guess what you would call the border. So, again, pray for India and this very dangerous situation. Again, we just have a very tenuous world right now. Again, there's already people here, and I think everything in India is very different as far as the political situation. Again, people are going to come out. It's terrible what he did in Kashmir and Jammu. Yes. But you also there are Indians who would see that very differently, who live there. Again, I'm not going to get into it, but one thing we all know is we do not want two nuclear powers. These are two nuclear powers with the most populous countries in the world facing off against each other. We don't want that, especially exploding bombs at each other and whatnot. And so, again, this pray for India and China and for cool heads. And, I did a recent update as well where this eclipse is this unification of the Shiva Shakti energy of, peace and spirituality and meditation and those higher vibrations. May those higher vibrations of peace permeate the mind of all who are involved here so that we don't have what would be an absolute catastrophe. Again, and it doesn't mean they're going to start exploding nuclear bombs, but you could have a war break out on the border of India and China. Again, this is a very dangerous eclipse point. It's right at the juncture between Mrigashira and Ardra. I said it before, I'll say it again. Ardra is the most destructive section. This is the most destructive section of the sky. Every war that we've had in the US, I looked it up. I should do a case study on Ardra. Every one of them had an important planet in Ardra when the war started. It is a place of war. And right now we have two armies. Again, that the whole army isn't there, but a border skirmish right here. This and Pakistan. India is, again, very tenuously placed with Muslim neighbors, quote, who are also nuclear powered. India has a nuclear power, Pakistan and China on both borders. And again, pray for India, pray for Pakistan, for China, and also for India, especially with the COVID and the possibility of COVID exploding again. I looked here before I checked on India. I checked on some Indian news sites and whatnot, and they're not reimposing the lockdown, martial law, the social distancing as much yet, but they're almost thinking about, imposing that, okay, everybody go back into your house again. I had a feeling when COVID started, it was going to ravage India because there's so many people. I mean, anybody who's been to India, social distancing in India, good God, I can't even conceive of that in any of the cities. I mean, you got a billion and a half people. How in the world do you even think of social distancing in Delhi or anywhere? It's just inconceivable. And China has been very aggressive, making a lot of aggressive moves in the South China Sea right now. And again, this is an aggressive move by China, but I want to stay out of the politics and say this is dangerous for sure. Prayers for China, for India, for the people of the world. And that's what I wanted to say about this. And may we all, rise to the highest, and our brothers and sisters not contract serious illnesses or die from any of these horrible possibilities right now, and we get through this eclipse in the highest sense. Again, this is the great possibility to unify that masculine and feminine, keep our eyes clear on the truth, and feel that truth anchored in the heart, where there's peace, love, and tolerance for everyone. So I'll just leave it at that.